The ghost of Joseph Conrad returns to the big screen in 1965 with Columbia's Lord Jim. But how do you make a big-budget action-adventure movie about a coward? Well, they tried it once back in 1925 with director Victor Fleming at the helm. Maybe it'll work this time. Jim is a young merchant seaman trained when Britannia still ruled the waves. He's put ashore to recover from a shipboard accident, and then later, after he's recovered, he signs on as a first officer to a freighter called the Patna. The ship is a rusted old hulk filled to the brim with Muslims on a pilgrimage to Mecca. The Patna runs into a storm, as ships do. Things look bad. They might not make it, and Jim is faced with it. Faced with a decision that all men, sooner or later, must face. To jump or not to jump? Aye. And there's the rub, as this movie tries to be an adventure story about a man who has a moment of cowardice and spends the rest of his life trying to redeem himself. So did he jump? Or did he accidentally fall off the ship during that terrible storm? The visuals and the editing seem to dance around the question. Did he or didn't he? Well, he certainly acts like he did. Looking at that sequence now, it could be taken as a visual metaphor about the fine line between heroism and cowardice, about the mental confusion, about the distorted sense of time, and then waking up as if from a coma. But it sure didn't feel that way back then, back when my brother Eddie and I saw it at the great Lowe's 175th Street Theater. In past videos, I've talked about how our family moved from Bay Terrace to Washington Heights. That transition changed our world. For one thing, everything was convenient, everything was at hand. But more importantly, it was heavily mixed. There were blacks, Puerto Ricans, Jews, Germans, Italians, and Irish. We all walked the same streets. And sometimes those streets were pretty mean for all of us. But we shared a lot. And one of the things we shared was going to the movies. And going to the movies at the great Lowe's 175th Street Theater. And that's why today it's only fitting that this great movie theater is now the United Palace of Cultural Arts and serves as a community arts center. Lin-Manuel Miranda of Hamilton fame even donated a new screen and projection system to the theater. In 2023, it even hosted the Tony Awards. Hearing things like that makes me want to move back to the neighborhood. Fleeing the scandal and seeking redemption, Jim becomes an exile by losing himself in the backwaters of Asia. And finally, by cutting himself off from civilization itself, as he sails a boat upriver to deliver munitions to a village now enslaved by a militaristic warlord. He does so at the behest of a European merchant named Stein, who's been trading with the villagers for decades. But the journey upriver is filled with treachery, as one of the crew was secretly working for the warlord. After killing another crew member and attempting to kill Jim, he escapes by diving over the side. Realizing his cover is blown, Jim manages to hide the weapons before being captured. After being tortured, Jim manages to escape from the warlord's compound with the help of the villagers. The rebels, with Jim's white man's guidance, succeed in overthrowing the warlord and peace returns to the village. Now that's quite a romantic notion. Redeem yourself by becoming a hero. Jim even gets the girl. But fate, karma, Joss, whatever you want to call it, all come knocking in the form of Gentleman Brown. Brown and Cornelius are after the treasure that the warlord looted from the village. Gentleman Brown and his gang of cutthroats sneak into the village under cover of darkness, but they are soon caught and surrounded by the villagers. During the fight, the young boy is killed. Brown plays on Jim's guilty conscience and white man's vanity. As a result, Jim urges the village chief to let Brown and his gang escape downriver. In exchange, Jim promises that if anyone else is killed, he will sacrifice his own life. Well, of course, that doesn't work, as Gentleman Brown and his gang make one last try for the treasure. During that attempt, the chief's son is killed. Stein begs the village chief to let Jim go and not hold him to his promise. Reluctant at first, the chief finally agrees. Stein urges Jim to leave, and it's here that the screenwriter side of director Richard Brooks puts a chokehold on his own film by injecting one too many philosophical monologues into the scene. It stalls the film just when it needs to end. But the next morning, Jim refuses to leave, and in full dress uniform, he hands his rifle over to the chief. Jim takes one last look at the day, and then the chief shoots him. Jim's body joins the funeral pyre. So, how do you make a big-budget action-adventure movie about a coward? The short answer is you cast it with great actors under the guidance of another great director. With Lord Jim, director Richard Brooks enters the David Lean sweepstakes, and the film looked great on that giant screen. Peter O'Toole was a highly theatrical actor, and combined with his early surgeries, his androgynous looks took on an artificial quality. He always looked like he was in makeup. Didn't matter, though. He was a great actor who owned every scene he was in. Because being Irish, that's what we do. O'Toole once said that he didn't like his performance as Jim. Perhaps he took on the role too soon after Lawrence. Is this Joseph Conrad's Jim or T.E. Lawrence? He gets tortured in both films, and by the looks of things, in much the same way. Jack Hawkins, a David Lean veteran from Bridge on the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia, is also on hand, as is James Mason, another veteran of big-budget adventure films. But I much prefer his work in films like Odd Man Out and Julius Caesar. Kurt Jurgens, who did his time as an international guest star in films like The Longest Stay, is quite the quisling in this film. He plays a former agent of Stein and Company who's now thrown in his lot with the warlord. He sweats a lot, and not just from the heat. And Akim Taramoff matches him drop for drop. Eli Wallach, as usual, steals the show. He was on a great run in the 60s with films like The Magnificent Seven, and then later The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Academy Award winner Paul Lukas plays Stein, Jim's mentor, benefactor, and surrogate father. Dahlia Lavi is exotically beautiful as the girl. That's her billing, the girl. My Favorite Year, one of my favorite movies, by the way, actually uses some of the footage from Jim's swashbuckling fantasies as footage from Alan Swan's films. Lord Jim's Cambodian locations were hot, humid, and hostile as Vietnam started heating up right across the border. The White Man's Burden is a poem written by Rudyard Kipling. It posits the idea that it's the white man's duty to manage the affairs of those who are non-white as they are less developed. That hasn't worked out very well, now has it? Not for Jim, and certainly not for the villagers. So, does Lord Jim work as a film? I remember one critic calling Apocalypse Now a flawed masterpiece. I think the same thing can be said about this other Conrad adaptation. And strangely enough, they both end with a very similar shot. The boat heading downriver. See you upriver.